June 8, 1944, northern France, near Saint-Lô. The smoke hadn't yet cleared when the German recovery team arrived. The sound of battle was still echoing in the distance, distant artillery, the dull hum of retreating engines. In a crater at the edge of a wheat field lay the wreckage of an American aircraft. Its wings were torn away, its fuselage twisted like molten steel, and the ground around it smelled of oil, fire, and scorched metal. A corporal lifted a fragment of aluminum, frowning. "Thunderbolt," he muttered. P-47. The name carried weight. Even among German soldiers, it was spoken with a mix of irritation and respect. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, the American fighter they called Der Kratschmacher. The noisemaker. It was huge, loud, and seemingly indestructible. As officers inspected the wreck, they found what they were looking for: the engine, mostly intact. It was massive, blackened by flame but still formidable. A Pratt Whitney R-2800 double wasp 18 cylinders arranged in twin radial rows, a 2,000 horsepower monster. One engineer, Lieutenant Weber, circled it slowly. "Look at the casing. It's not like ours," he said quietly. "Thicker. Reinforced." He knelt beside the shattered propeller hub. "They built it to take punishment, not avoid it." Another officer, Hauptmann Bauer, glanced toward the sky. "And it flew, even like that," he said. "We hit one last month, took 20 cannon shells before it came down." They called in a transport detail. The engine was to be taken to Reckland, Germany's top Luftwaffe testing center, under strict orders. Command wanted it studied immediately. As the soldiers loaded the charred mass onto a truck, Weber couldn't take his eyes off it. There was something unnatural about it, not elegant, not refined like a Messerschmitt, but brutal, efficient, alive. He whispered, "It looks American." The officer beside him smirked. "Then it must be heavy, wasteful, and loud." Weber didn't answer. June 14, 1944, Recklinlars Airfield, Germany. The convoy rumbled through the night, 3 trucks escorted by armed guards. The largest carried a single crate, marked with stenciled letters, U.S. aircraft engine, captured near Saint-Lô. Inside it rested the burned, twisted heart of an American Thunderbolt. At dawn, the trucks reached Erprobungsstelle Reckling, the Luftwaffe's most secret test facility, a place where the Reich's best engineers and pilots studied both triumphs and fears. It was here that new aircraft were born, and where captured ones were taken apart like puzzles. A team of engineers awaited the arrival. Among them was Dr. Ernst Keller, chief mechanical analyst. He was a man of precision and pride, the kind of engineer who could identify an engine's manufacturer just by its vibration. Yet as he watched the soldiers unload the crate, his expression darkened. The engine was enormous, almost grotesque in scale. When the crate was opened, silence fell. The Pratt Whitney R-2800 gleamed even under soot and damage. Its dual radial rows were encased in thick, precisely machined steel. Each cylinder bore markings in clean English letters, and the cooling fins looked unlike anything Keller had seen in German engines. 2,000 horsepower, said Lieutenant Weber, who had escorted the convoy. It flew until the last moment. Keller circled the engine, inspecting the melted cowling and fractured exhaust pipes. 2,000? He muttered. With that weight? Impossible. They hoisted the engine onto a test bench. The room filled with the smell of oil and sea salt from the Atlantic air trapped in its metal. One of the assistants, a young designer from BMW's engine division, whispered, "Her doctor. It's like something from another age." Keller adjusted his spectacles. "No," he said. "It's from another industry." He placed his hand on the engine's cracked housing, feeling the texture of the alloy. It was smooth, too smooth. Not hand-finished. June 17, 1944, Reckling, Germany. The engine lay on the steel workbench like a fallen god, massive, blackened, yet strangely elegant. Around it, the test hangar buzzed with quiet anticipation. German engineers and mechanics gathered like surgeons preparing for an autopsy. Dr. Ernst Keller stood at the center. "Begin removal of the cowling," he ordered. Technicians unbolted the scorched panels, revealing the heart of the Pratt Whitney R-2800 double wasp. The first surprise came instantly. The bolts turned smoothly clean, perfectly machined, identical. Keller compared one to a German bolt and frowned. "They're all the same," he muttered. "Every thread, every size, perfect tolerance." Lieutenant Weber blinked. "Is that unusual?" "For us?" "Yes. For them, it means one factory's part fits every engine. Interchangeable perfection." They removed the cylinder heads. The pistons gleamed balanced, flawless even after impact. Cylinder walls showed nowhere. A metallurgist scratched the surface. "Nickel chromium alloy," he said quietly. "We can't make this, not at this purity." The deeper they went, the more alien it became. Fuel injectors precise as clockwork, spark plugs that looked new, and an oil cooling labyrinth unlike anything in the BMW 801. Keller tapped his pen. "Their measurements aren't in tenths of millimeters, but in thousandths." He looked up. "And they mass-produce this." Someone laughed nervously. "Surely it's overbuilt, Herr Doctor." Keller's gaze darkened. "No. It's built to survive and to be replaced." Then they uncovered the turbo supercharger, a maze of pipes and polished steel. Weber stared. "So that's how it climbs so high." Keller nodded. "It breathes where ours suffocate." Silence fell. Every man knew this was more than a machine. It was proof that America wasn't just fighting with pilots, but with factories. June 20, 1944, Rechlin, Germany. 3 days after disassembly, the American engine stood ready on a reinforced test bench. Technicians tightened the final bolts while Dr. Ernst Keller watched silently, clipboard in hand. "Let's see if this American beast still lives," he said. The Pratt Whitney R-2800 required fuel far beyond what Germany could offer. U.S. aircraft used 100-octane gasoline, smooth, powerful, clean. The Luftwaffe had barely 87. Still, they tried. The starter spun. A cough, a puff of black smoke, then silence. The gauges flickered wildly. "Mixture too rich." Someone shouted. Keller shook his head. "No, the fuel's wrong. It's suffocating." They adjusted the carburetor, warmed the oil, changed pressure valves. Finally, the motor caught. The roar that followed shook the hangar, deep, steady, almost alive. The propeller blurred, the sound rolling like thunder, but within seconds the tone shifted. The flames turned orange, the rhythm broke, and the engine died again with a choking gasp. Keller removed his goggles slowly. "It rejects our fuel," he said. "It was built for something purer. Something we don't have." A BMW engineer checked the lines. "Even our oil burns too thick." Keller nodded. "They refine abundance. We imitate it." He placed his hand on the cooling fins, still warm. "This isn't just horsepower. It's civilization made metal." Outside, air raid sirens began to wail. The engineers looked up, instinctively. Keller didn't move. He stood by the silent machine, watching thin smoke rise from its cylinders. In that moment, he understood the truth he'd been avoiding. Germany hadn't run out of courage, it had run out of fuel. June 23, 1944, Rechlin, Germany. The engine had fallen silent, but its secrets had not. The next phase was the dissection of its lungs, the turbo supercharger, the part that allowed the Thunderbolt to breathe at impossible heights. Dr. Ernst Keller oversaw the process, his sleeves rolled up, a thin film of oil on his hands. "Careful with the housing," he warned. "It's precision work." The cover came off with a clean metallic snap. Inside was a maze of polished tubes, curved like veins. Every joint was flawless, no weld marks, no rough edges. The metal shimmered faintly under the lamps. Weber leaned in. "What alloy is that? It doesn't look like steel." A metallurgist ran a magnet across the surface. "Nothing. Non-ferrous," he said quietly. "Likely nickel, maybe chromium, or an American superalloy." Keller picked up a broken fragment and studied its grain. Fine texture. No impurities. Uniform throughout. He sighed. This was cast, not forged, and in perfect vacuum conditions. The others stared blankly. They didn't have such furnaces. Germany could build miracles in design, but not in mass production. The Allies, however, could do both endlessly. They continued dismantling the turbo unit, revealing an intricate bearing assembly lubricated through microchannels. "Look," Keller said. "It's self-regulating. It feeds itself based on pressure. Even our JUMO turbines don't have this." Weber frowned. "Could we copy it?" Keller smiled faintly. "Perhaps on paper. But to build it? We'd need factories that no longer exist, bombed weeks ago." Silence settled. The hangar lights flickered from the tremors of distant explosions. Another raid somewhere west of Berlin. Keller rested the metal fragment on the table. "They built for scale, not pride," he said. "Every piece identical, every flaw removed. It's not craftsmanship. It's an ecosystem." He turned to his team. "Gentlemen, they aren't ahead of us in ideas. They're ahead of us in capacity." June 26, 1944, Rechlin, Germany. The hangar looked like a gallery of engines, 3 Titans side by side. The German BMW 801, the liquid-cooled Junkers JUMO 213, and the captured Pratt Whitney R-2800 from the Thunderbolt. Dr. Ernst Keller stood before them. "Gentlemen, today we learn the difference between design and endurance." The BMW 801 was elegant and compact, polished, perfectly aligned. The JUMO 213 gleamed with precision, built for speed. But the American engine dwarfed them both. Thick, heavy, and brutally simple, a weapon of pure function. Keller pointed to the BMW's casing. "Lightweight. Beautiful. But thin, one overheat, and it cracks." Then he tapped the R-2800 cylinder. "This one could survive flak. It's not art, it's armor." A young engineer frowned. "But it burns too much fuel." Keller nodded. "And they have oceans of it. We build for scarcity, they build for abundance." They compared pistons, bearings, and mounts. The Americans used alloys none of them recognized: nickel, cobalt, molybdenum. Their machining was coarse but exact. The BMW piston looked elegant beside the Thunderbolts, but fragile, like glass beside iron. Weber scribbled in his notebook. "Every part heavier." Keller replied, "Every part replaceable." He looked between the 3 engines, Germany's finest, and America's average. Then he said quietly, "We built masterpieces." They built machines that never stop. Outside, faint tremors from Allied bombers rippled through the floor. Keller didn't look up. His gaze stayed fixed on the American engine, knowing it represented something far greater than horsepower, a kind of power that Germany could no longer match. June 30, 1944, Rechlin, Germany. The conference room smelled of coffee, sweat, and cigarette smoke. Maps and blueprints covered the walls. Around the table sat Luftwaffe officers in crisp uniforms, men of command, not creation. Dr. Ernst Keller stood before them with a folder marked R-2800 analysis. He spoke evenly. "This engine delivers over 2,000 horsepower. It can run under damage, at altitude, and sustain heat we cannot manage. An officer frowned. You have the engine. You have its parts. Why can't we copy it? Keller replied calmly, because it isn't a design problem. It's industrial. He opened a chart showing metal samples. These alloys require elements we no longer have. The precision of each cylinder is within thousandths of a millimeter. We cannot reproduce that on our machines, not under bombardment. The room stiffened. One general leaned forward. Then simplify it. Make a German version. Keller sighed. Simplify it, and it will explode. We can build the shape, not the soul. The general slammed his fist. The Führer expects results, Doctor. The front demands new engines. Keller met his eyes. The front needs fuel, not miracles. Silence followed. No one answered. Everyone knew it was true. After the meeting, Keller returned to the hangar. Weber was waiting by the American engine. How did it go? He asked. Keller gave a tired smile. They want me to copy Thunder with a whisper. He looked at the silent R-2800 and said quietly, they still believe wars are won by courage. But courage doesn't spin turbines. July 3, 1944, Rechlin, Germany. The order from Berlin was clear: replicate the American engine. In the hangar, the team began the impossible task, turning the R-2800 into a German version. Dr. Ernst Keller stood over the blueprint table. We'll start with the pistons, he said. Dimensions first, then materials. They used the best steel they had, Krupp alloy, strong but brittle. The first piston cracked after 10 hours of machining. The second one warped under heat. By the fifth, even Weber lost patience. It's like carving ice with a hammer, he muttered. Keller only nodded. The Americans had access to perfect aluminum blends, made in refineries untouched by bombs. The Germans, cut off from raw materials, relied on synthetic substitutes. Every attempt to match the metal failed. The team then tried to reproduce the turbocharger. The American unit was made of high-temperature alloys that simply didn't exist in German production. Their copy melted on the test stand after 2 minutes. Weber threw his gloves on the table. Even our bolts don't fit the same thread. Keller replied quietly, they built with consistency. We build with improvisation. They tried adjusting every tolerance, redrawing parts by hand, swapping components from the BMW 801. Nothing aligned. It was as if the American engine came from another world, one where factories breathed instead of labored. By the end of the week, the floor was littered with twisted metal, failed castings, and broken dreams. Keller walked among the wreckage, exhausted. We can copy their shape, he said softly, but not their process. Weber looked at him. So what do we tell Berlin? Keller stared at the shattered turbocharger, its edges glinting under the light. Tell them, he said, we've met the limits of genius. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, not from the sky, but from Allied bombers approaching once more. July 6, 1944, Rechlin, Germany. News of the failed copy had reached Berlin. Now an inspector was coming, Oberst Heinrich Voigt, from the Ministry of Aviation. Known for his temper and devotion to the party, he arrived like a storm. He stepped into the hangar, boots echoing on concrete. So, he said coldly, this is the American engine you all admire? Dr. Ernst Keller met his stare. We don't admire it, Herr Oberst. We study it. Voigt circled the R-2800, running a gloved hand across the metal. I hear you can't reproduce it. I find that disappointing. Keller replied evenly, we lack the alloys, the precision tools, and the octane fuel it demands. Excuses, Voigt snapped. Prove it's not superior. Run a test. The engineers hesitated, then began assembling the engine. Keller gave the signal. The propeller spun once, twice, then the engine roared to life. The sound was deafening. The R-2800's deep growl filled the hangar, shaking the walls. Voight flinched. It wasn't just noise, it was confidence made mechanical. How long can it run? He shouted. Keller replied calmly, as long as it has fuel. They let it run full throttle for 15 minutes. No misfires. No vibration. Gauges steady. When it stopped, the silence felt heavier than the sound. Voight turned sharply. You will report this as inconclusive. Keller nodded. Of course, Herr Oberst. As the car drove away, Weber whispered, he's afraid. Keller looked at the quiet engine. Not afraid, he said softly. He's realized it runs on something Germany has lost, stability. July 10, 1944, Rechlin, Germany. 4 days after the test, a sealed message arrived from Berlin. The red wax bore the Luftwaffe Eagle, Directive 117B. It read, immediate development of an improved radial engine capable of matching the American R-2800 in performance and reliability. Report progress weekly. Dr. Ernst Keller read it twice, then folded it carefully. Around him, the engineers waited in silence. Finally, he said, they want perfection from a factory that barely has power. Weber frowned. They think we can fix it? Keller nodded grimly. They think patriotism can replace metallurgy. The hangar buzzed with weary motion. They tried again, new pistons, thicker bearings. Reinforced valves. Each improvement added weight, reduced efficiency, or failed under heat. The machines themselves were exhausted, lathes running on borrowed electricity, coolant mixed from melted snow. During one test, a prototype engine cracked open mid-run, spraying oil across the floor. Weber shut it down instantly. The sound of grinding metal filled the air like a wounded animal. Keller stared at the wreckage. You see? It's not the design that's failing, it's the foundation. That evening, they gathered outside, watching the horizon glow red from distant bombing raids. Every night they rebuild, Weber muttered. Every night we lose more. Keller nodded slowly. That's the difference. They produce through destruction. We rebuild into ruins. A messenger arrived later, requesting Keller's report for Berlin. He wrote a single line, engine remains operational only in theory. Materials and conditions make replication impractical. He sealed the envelope and handed it off. They'll call it defeatism, Weber said quietly. Keller replied, no, it's physics. He turned toward the hangar one last time, where the American engine still stood untouched. We could spend 1,000 hours improving ours, he said softly. July 18, 1944, Berlin, Germany. At dawn, a black staff car arrived at Rechlin. The driver handed Dr. Ernst Keller a sealed envelope, by order of the Air Ministry. Immediate transfer to Berlin. No reason. No explanation. Only obedience. The drive was long and quiet. Fields burned along the roadside, bridges lay in ruins. Keller stared through the window, watching the wreckage of an empire that once promised eternity. By evening, he reached Wilhelmstrasse. Inside a gray marble building, an officer from the Armaments Ministry greeted him briskly. Dr. Keller, your analysis of the American engine has reached the highest level. The Reich requires your expertise for a new project, Project Sturmvogel. He opened a folder showing crude sketches of hybrid jet designs, half piston, half turbine. We believe your knowledge of the R-2800 can make this possible, the officer said. Keller studied the drawings. You want to merge systems that cannot coexist. It's a dream built on smoke. The officer's eyes narrowed. Miracles, doctor, are all the Reich demands now. Keller closed the folder. You don't need miracles. You need fuel. Enough, the officer snapped. You will report to Tempelhof tomorrow. That night, Keller sat in a dim room provided by the ministry. Outside, distant bombers rumbled above Berlin's skyline. The city shook, yet orders still came as if nothing was burning. He opened his notebook and wrote, "They no longer seek progress. Only illusions strong enough to hide collapse." Another siren wailed through the city, a familiar reminder that the empire was still pretending to breathe. July 21, 1944, Tempelhof Airfield, Berlin. The next morning, Keller arrived at what once had been a proud symbol of German aviation, the Tempelhof hangars. Now they were half ruined, patched with scaffolding, windows shattered by blasts. Guards with hollow eyes waved him through. Inside, the so-called laboratory looked more like a scrapyard. Scattered turbine parts, melted alloys, half-built engines, all coated in dust and desperation. On the far side of the hall, a group of engineers worked under dim lamps, their faces pale from exhaustion. A young officer approached. "Herr Dr. Keller? I'm Engineer Vogelsang. Welcome to Project Sturmvogel." He gestured proudly toward a large, deformed contraption in the center, a hybrid piston turbine engine. Tubes snaked in every direction, wires hung loose, and smoke rose from a leaking valve. Keller studied it silently. "How long has it run?" Vogelsang hesitated. "It hasn't yet." Keller opened a maintenance panel and winced. The workmanship was rushed, mismatched bolts, cracked welds, reused scrap metal from bombed factories. "You're trying to build flight from rubble," he said quietly. Vogelsang lowered his voice. "Berlin wants results. They send orders faster than we can solder parts." Across the hall, a group of uniformed officials observed the chaos through glass. They weren't scientists, they were politicians in panic. Keller turned to his exhausted colleagues. "You're not building a machine," he said softly. "You're building a monument to denial." One engineer, older and gaunt, looked up from his bench. "You saw the American engine," he said. "Could it win a war alone?" Keller shook his head. "No. But it could end one." Outside, another siren began to wail. Dust drifted down from the ceiling. Yet no one stopped working, not from faith, but from fear. Keller glanced once more at the broken miracle engine and whispered, "It mistaken noise for progress." July 24, 1944, Tempelhof, Berlin. For 3 days the team at Project Sturmvogel worked without rest. Orders from the ministry demanded results, a test, a spark, anything to prove hope still existed. Dr. Ernst Keller stood near the center of the hangar, staring at the patched-together machine. Its wires twisted like veins, oil leaking from mismatched joints. Still, the command had come, activate prototype immediately. Vogelsang's hands trembled as he checked the ignition cables. "It's not ready," he whispered. Keller nodded slowly. "It never will be." But the officers behind the glass observation booth were already watching, notebooks open, eager for numbers that would never come. "Begin," Keller said softly. The starter motor whined. The hybrid engine coughed, spat smoke, then roared to life with a violent metallic scream. The entire structure shuddered. Flames burst from one exhaust. Engineers shouted, scrambling for cover. Keller watched as gauges swung wildly, pressure redlining, temperature soaring. "Cut it!" he yelled. "It won't respond." Vogelsang cried, a flash, then an explosion tore through the chamber. Metal fragments flew like shrapnel, glass shattered, smoke filled the air. The sound was deafening, like thunder trapped inside steel. When it cleared, the machine was gone, only a mangled frame remained. 2 engineers lay wounded, one unconscious. The officers behind the glass had vanished. Keller knelt beside the wreckage, coughing through the haze. "That," he said hoarsely, "is what happens when illusion meets reality." Vogelsang, his face blackened with soot, looked around the ruined hall. They'll call it sabotage, he said. Keller shook his head. No. They'll call it progress, because they don't know the difference anymore. Outside, the air raid sirens began again, another Allied wave over the burning capital. Keller looked toward the sound. Soon, he whispered, the real engines will arrive and they will run. April 1945, Rechlin, Germany, the war was ending. Allied tanks were moving east, their tracks grinding through villages once filled with flags and songs. Rechlin, once the heart of German aviation, was now a graveyard of machines. Dr. Ernst Keller returned there under gray skies. The hangars stood half collapsed, filled with twisted engines and shattered propellers. Birds nested where mechanics once worked. Among the debris, he saw a familiar shape, the Pratt Whitney R-2800, still mounted on its old stand, covered in dust. It hadn't been touched since the day of the test. He brushed the metal gently with his sleeve. You're still here, he murmured. Weber, thinner now, joined him. They're evacuating south. Americans will be here in days. Keller nodded. Let them come. Perhaps they'll find what we couldn't. Moments later, the rumble of aircraft echoed above. Through the open hangar doors, they saw P-47 Thunderbolts flying low, silver wings glinting in sunlight. The same kind of machine that once inspired ridicule. Now symbols of inevitability. Keller watched silently. We tried to build brilliance, he said. They built endurance. Weber turned to him. What will we tell them if they ask what we learned? Keller smiled faintly. Tell them we discovered what power really means. As the Thunderbolts disappeared into the clouds, Keller closed his notebook for the last time. On the final page, one line stood alone: victory belongs not to the genius who invents, but to the nation that builds. He looked once more at the silent engine, its American star barely visible under layers of dust. Outside, the wind carried the distant sound of approaching engines, the same thunder that had haunted him for months, only now, it didn't sound like defeat, it sounded like history moving forward.